a tree, where there strung up a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be, if we met at midnight, in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I drink coffee so that others might live. Well, that might have been true back when I had a job. Protecting the citizens of America from the invasion coming up from the South. Well, that's how I saw my job back then. I drank coffee all the time, night and day, even in the evening shift. I drank a ton of really bad coffee because we didn't have a decent shop that knew how to brew up the nectar of the gods. The grocery stores carried the usual suspects, cans of coffee roasted at some time way back in the past and of uncertain origin. Then one day a store opened just off of Delmar called Scholar's Coffee Shop. I would swing by and grab a cup before the beginning of my shift. I got to talking to Gerardo about all things coffee and history and anything of interest. Scholars moved over to Springfield, which was great because it was now closer to our home. December 21st, 2012, y'all remember that date? We were going to grab a cup of coffee and maybe a couple of sandwiches. They were closed. Odd. I looked online and I saw they weren't just closed, they were gone. Kaputski. The Mayans were right. The world had ended that day. Back to drinking substandard coffee. Oh, the humanity of it. Maggie from Arkansas told us a couple had just opened a coffee shop on Iturbide Street. We used to call it Eider by Day, just because. My wife and I swung by only to find that they were actually in the process of opening. However, Julio let us in and made some much-needed and some of the best coffee I'd ever had. We got to talking about all things coffee and history and anything of interest. The shop moved a few times. It went up one block and over several to Lincoln. Finally, it came to rest on McPherson, much closer to our home. For the best coffee on earth, go to 4501 McPherson or organicmancoffeetrek.shop. No more bad coffee. I'm going to try playing a Trailer Trash Terrors beginning. I was on Vic Hermanson's show, and Annabelle Lee did the introduction. I thought y'all might get a kick out of it. You know how I really hate editing, but, well, here I am, editing. Those of y'all watching on the video, I'll just simply sit here and stare at the camera while she talks, and those of y'all listening on a podcast, well, you won't have to look at me. So here it is from Vic Hermanson's Trailer Trash Terrors. Annabelle Lee telling you.
Trailer Trash Terrors.
Greetings, temporal humans. This is Boudreaux, the punctilious, cybernetic ghost from the future. That word means that I am extremely attentive to even the most minuscule details of action and behavior. Believe me, if I were less punctilious, Vic Hermanson would have placed Trailer Trash Terrors in full FUBAR mode long ago, though I must admit, his podcasting competence is now in the measurable positive range. Welcome to episode 106 of the Trailer Trash Terrors podcast. Tonight, Annabelle Lee will introduce our excellent guest, Chris James.
Hello, this is Annabelle Lee, speaking to you from 51 immutable, plank time units in the future. Chris James is an author, a former Border Patrol agent, a ghost hunter, a witness of the white crawler phenomenon, and the host of over 400 episodes of the Strange Things with Chris James podcast. Take it from me, that number of carefully researched, recorded, and completed episodes is nothing short of astounding. It seems that Chris James loves coffee above all other food and drink that mankind has created. When I was still part of real time, my favorite drink was milk, straight from the cow, mixed with switchel, which was a mixture of vinegar, molasses, ginger, and honey. It was so good it even made my lovely, long, flowing, chestnut-colored hair happy. But then again, I never had access to coffee from the Organic Man Coffee Trike, located at 4501 McPherson in Laredo, Texas. Chris says they have the best coffee on the planet, maybe the entire universe. He's probably correct about the planet part. But I know for sure that Chris has never had Tralfamadorian, Full Fatalist, Black Hole Roast Coffee, Billy Pilgrim's favorite. And so it goes. And now that I've had a little fun, let's get to Vic Hermanson and Chris James. This episode is titled, Laredo Doesn't Have the Only Creepy Little Girl. Chris James explains it all for you.
And there you have it. That was the intro to Trailer Trash Terrors. Like I said, you should check out his podcast and see what's going on in other parts of the strange and creepy world. I hope it worked out, because you know how I hate editing. Lowell Howard, one of my longtime listeners, sent me a text about his trip to the Loveland Frogman Festival. This was their second annual festival. There were vendors and people showed up at Loveland, Ohio, selling things. Jewelry, candles, t-shirts, you name it, there are tables filled with things. The problem is they don't have any connection to the event itself. I go to Edinburgh UFO Festival just about every year. I have books on paranormal and UFOs, so I fit in with the subject. Maybe half the folks are just there to make a few bucks, which I don't have a problem with that, but if you're selling jewelry and candles and t-shirts at a UFO conference, maybe you should have some UFO and other subject matter to sell to people. After all, they want souvenirs. A necklace with a little flying saucer on it would probably sell a lot better than you'd think. At the Frogman Festival, there were a bunch of speakers to inform folks of all the things paranormal. The legend of the Loveland Frogmen begins in the early summer of 1955. The exact date has been kind of lost to time, but most reports place it sometime in May. In and around Loveland, there are numerous bridges that crisscross the Little Miami River. A businessman was driving late at night and found he needed to stop. The call of nature. And you know, when nature calls, you gotta go. Standing on the side of the road, he saw 3 bizarre-looking creatures. They were about 3 to 4 feet tall, covered with leathery green skin. The creatures were all standing erect, bipedal. They had heads and faces that looked exactly like frogs. They had webbed hands and feet, and they appeared to be totally hairless. August 21st, 1955, two women were swimming in the Little Miami when something grabbed one of them from below. She didn't know what had her, she just knew that she was in trouble. This was near Evansville, Indiana, which is about 300 miles from Loveland. The attacker dragged the woman under several times before her friend could come to the rescue. Once safely on shore, they saw a handprint that had long, bony fingers and scratch marks from the claws. The handprint was green, and it looked as if it had been painted on her leg, or maybe it was dyed on. It took several hours before it faded away. Now, unfortunately, 1955, nobody carried around a camera with them all the time. March 3rd, 1972, at about 1 a.m., a police officer, Ray Shockey, was traveling on Riverside Drive heading into town. The police officer was traveling cautiously because the weather was quite nasty. On the side of the road, he saw an animal. The creature scurried across the road, and the officer said he slammed on the brakes to keep from hitting it. Once stopped, he had the creature fully illuminated in his headlights. The creature was crouching like a frog. It stood up on its hind legs and it stared at the cruiser. It was about 3 to 3.5 feet tall, 50 to 70 pounds, with leathery green skin. Finally, it turned and climbed over the guardrail down into the Little Miami River. Other officers found the guardrail had distinct abrasions and rub marks exactly where it is reported the animal had crawled over the metal barrier. There was a second officer who also saw the creature, 1972, Officer Matt Strolling. During one night on patrol near the banks of the Little Miami River, Officer Strolling caught sight of a creature crouching along the riverbank. Described as standing approximately 3 to 4 feet tall, with leathery green skin and distinct frog-like features. The creature's eyes emitted an uncanny luminosity, reflecting the beams of the patrol car's headlights. As Officer Strolling approached the creature, it swiftly leaped into the river, vanishing without a trace. A man named Sam Jacobs said he was playing Pokemon Go in mid-August 2016 near Congregation Beth Adam Synagogue on Loveland Madera Road. Jacobs said he had crossed the train tracks to the banks of Lake Isabella, where he spotted something strange. He saw a huge frog, about 4 feet tall, and it was walking on two legs. He tried to take a few photos, but his cell phone, but they came out way too dark. Let's get back to Lowell. He went to the Frog Fest, and he got to talk to a bunch of people there. He told me that several of the folks at the festival talked about something called the Albatwitch. This was new to him, and he asked me about it. Well, I'd never heard of the creature either, which got me to thinking and looking into it. As always, as I'm doing research, I get a little sidetracked into other things. That's why I have to use notes. The following show is going to run down a few rabbit holes, but fear not, I'll try to tie up all the loose ends before the end of the hour. The Albatwitch is a local legend in and around Columbia, Pennsylvania. This creature is a small, about 4 foot tall, man-like creature that lives in the wooded areas. Most sightings of these creatures were around the Chickas Rock, a heavily wooded area. The name of the creek comes from the Lenape Chickasalunga, meaning place of crayfish. The rock overlooking the creek was so dubbed. Crayfish? Good Lord! Of all the things that people are going to eat, mud bugs. I say, nay, nay. There are things I will not eat. I will not eat them on a plate. I will not eat them even late. I'm not Dr. Seuss. Here's a weird little thing. I remember from 100 years ago, try that again, Green Eggs and Ham was the first book I ever read. My brother had the whole collection, and he allowed me to read them once in a while. I would love to hear Lionel Fanthorpe read Green Eggs and Ham. Shoot, Lionel Fanthorpe could read the phone book, and it would be interesting. Reports of these hairy little creatures were told all up and down the Susquehanna River. My first thought was people were just seeing a juvenile Bigfoot. As I read more about these small beings, I found out there are some differences. The Albatwitch has more of a neck, and it's been reported as being a lot skinnier and more human-like in proportions. They've been found in apple trees, stealing fruit. If a person was to encounter an Albatwitch, it was known to throw apples as a means of defense. Ever get hit by a well-aimed apple? It hurts a lot, especially if you get hit in the eye. Well, my brother swore it was an accident, but I couldn't see out of my right eye for a few days. Albatwitch were also reported from wooded areas all along the river shore. The creature's name comes from their propensity for eating apples. They'll grab them anytime they can, either from a tree or from somebody's picnic basket. The name Albatwitch comes from the Pennsylvania Dutch, who aren't Dutch, which means apple snitch, apple stealer. If you were to run into somebody back in the early days that looked a bit different from you, you might ask them where they're from. If you asked a German, they wouldn't say they were German. They would say they were Deutsch. They come from Deutschland. People hearing this just assumed, and you know what happens when you assume. These folks were saying they were Dutch. Kind of like how Jacob Waltz, who came from Germany back in 1815, became the founder of the Lost Dutchman's Mine. The Lost German's Mine just doesn't have the same ring. You'd think when the Pennsylvania Dutch built a place called Germantown, the locals would have caught on. Let's make the old gray matter hurt even more. There is no such country as Holland. It doesn't exist. Holland is a geographical region and a former province on the western coast of the Netherlands. Netherlands means lowlands. That's why you see those pictures of the giant windmills and the dikes and the kids with their fingers stuck in holes. All Dutch people are from the Netherlands, but all people from the Netherlands are not Dutch. The Dutch are an ethnic group native to the Netherlands. They all speak German, and I'm not going to get into the whole Flying Dutchman story again. Legend says the Albatwitch either became extinct or they were driven nearly into extinction in the latter part of the 19th century. The folks growing apples didn't want some small critter eating into their profits. Throwing apples at folks armed with rifles, is a quick way to go extinct. Chicka's Rock, where the creatures lived, still has a tradition of strange sightings and sounds. From 1950 and into 1970s, a small humanoid figure was seen several times. Legend also tells of people hearing a sound reminiscent to a whip being cracked. Think Indiana Jones. There are some stories going around of people hearing a cracking sound when a portal opens or closes. They hear the sound, they see a black swirling mass, and on occasion, something steps out. The something has been described as looking like a Sasquatch. Is there a relation between the Albatwitch, Bigfoot, and these portals? The boys in the white lab coat have admitted there are dozens, maybe even thousands, of other universes. They liken it to a bunch of soap bubbles all bumped up against each other. The universes might be other dimensions or other timelines. The folks at CERN, that place in Switzerland with the statue of Shiva and the 666 hidden in their icon, are doing some spooky things under the guise of science. They say they're just trying to look at the beginning of the universe, the one we live in. I believe, as do many of the people I know, they're trying to open a portal, the one that Crowley opened, or maybe reestablish contact with the old ones. The beings that want to take over our planet and maybe our whole universe. In 1917, Aleister Crowley described a meeting with a preternatural entity named Lamb that was similar in appearance to modern-day Gray. Crowley believed he had contacted an entity through a process that he called the Alamantha workings. This magical ritual was conducted to allow humans to contact beings from outer space or maybe from other dimensions, maybe other universes. A follower of Crowley, who later broke away to do his own thing, was Jack Parsons, the founder of Jet Propulsion Laboratory. More boys in white lab coats doing weird things. Parsons wanted to do the Babylon workings ritual. One of his stated intentions was to bring into being a homunculus named the Moonchild. Crowley said Parsons and his gang, one of them was known as L. Ron, not going to say the rest of it. Crowley said this bunch wasn't ready for such an involved ritual. He wasn't so much trying to stop them as have them do more research and training. Parsons wasn't the kind to be dissuaded. He began his magic feat in 1945 and ran into 1946. This was a long, multi-month ritual where folks got undressed and messed around with each other. Lots of drinking and drugs from what I could find. A woman appeared in Parsons' home. Now, they didn't say if she was invited to attend these wild parties or she just showed up unannounced. But Parsons thought she was the one that he had been trying to summon. Kenneth Arnold made one of the first widely reported UFO sightings of 9 silver discs in Washington State, June 24th, 1947. Crowley died December 1947, a year after Parsons and his minions performed that ritual they were probably not ready for. Are these dates connected? Perhaps. It is theorized by many folks I am in contact with that the Babylon workings opened a rift into our space-time, allowing beings from other universes or dimensions to cross over. Others say that Crowley had opened this doorway back in 1917 when he contacted Lamb. Crowley was able to open and close this connection between our universes. Parsons simply threw the doorway open and left it that way. A gateway for the great old ones has already been established and opened by members of the OTO, one of Crowley's religious groups. UFOs have been with us since the first humans were able to record seeing things in the sky. After Parsons and his ilk opened that portal they forgot to or didn't want to close, the numbers of sightings has gone up at an incredible rate. Also, the number of paranormal encounters has increased. Some folks tell me that Bigfoot and UFOs aren't paranormal. Well, they are in my books, and I've written a few. Local legends in and around Chickasaw Rock speak of the sound like a cracking of a whip heard in the woods at night. On occasion, right after this sound, a small, hairy humanoid is seen. Are people still encountering the Albatwitch, or some being coming from another universe? A parallel universe might just be very similar to ours. The diverging timelines caused as people took one pathway instead of the other. The theory is somewhere out there is another timeline where my dad decided to invest in some Apple company and I grew up rich. My other self is probably conceited and stingy as all get out. There should be another timeline where I'm living in Austin, Texas, since I had decided to take that National Guard job that they had offered me at Camp Mabry. I was offered a teaching slot back in 1988, but I went with the Border Patrol instead. Better pay and a move south. With the possibility of thousands of universes out there, there could be one inhabited by creatures we really don't want to run into. The old ones. We have people living amongst us who actually believe these creatures will come to our world, take over, and the folks that invited them back will rule side by side with them. Think of that scene in Ghostbusters Afterlife when Gozer the Gozerian comes back from the great beyond. Ivo Shandor, played by J.K. Simmons, he played Edwin Pollard in Dark Skies, a pretty good UFO movie you might want to check out. Well, Ivo Shandor greets her and he does the whole welcome back from wherever, and she rips him in half. I think anyone who thinks the old ones are going to be super thankful for the assist back are delusional. They'll find themselves the first casualties in the invasion. People tell about seeing a portal open and hair-covered creatures coming through, both huge and diminutive. Beings coming through from another universe that look like the Albatwitch. Then again, we don't know if these apple munchers were really killed off or they simply got better at hiding. A report involving the sighting of a hairy humanoid came from Lancaster, 1973. Lancaster is 10 miles east of Columbia. Another came from a town of North Anvil, 20 miles to the north, in the same year. A number of reports have come out of York County as well. The Susquehannock Indian tribe had legends of an ape-like creature. Sometimes they depicted it in paintings. The Susquehannocks were a tribe living in Pennsylvania. One of their villages was at the base of the Chickasaw Rock. Seeing as the Indians didn't grow apples, they had no trouble with these creatures. With the exception of wild sour crab apples, apples are not indigenous to North America. Seeds were brought over to the colonies by the Puritans in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Cider apples made up a majority of the apple varieties in the U.S. until the late 19th and early 20th century. These were used to make alcohol, hard cider. October is the traditional harvest time. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, they have Albatwitch Day. This has been going on since 2014. All things apple related are to be found at the celebrations all throughout the area. Music, too much drinking, more music, food, more drinking. The festival's main event is when folks gather together to bombard the trees with apples, hoping to entice an albatwitch to show itself. Some folks bring gunny sacks, hoping to capture one of these creatures. Since this is a local legend, it hasn't spread across the country like Bigfoot or other cryptids. The festival staff expect around 6,000 to 7,000 visitors to come to the gathering. It might not all be fun and games. In 1980, a family was visiting the festival when one of their kids was almost kidnapped. As apples were being pelted into the trees, a small boy was able to enter the woods. He was accosted by several small, hairy creatures that grabbed him and forced him up against a tree. He let out with an ear-piercing scream, which brought rescuers to the run. As the adults came closer, the Albatwitch fled. That's his story, and he swears it's true. Rick Fisher owns a massive Albatwitch artifact collection that was once a part of the National Museum of Mysteries and Research Center. Fisher says in 2002, on Valentine's Day, well, actually it was at night, he saw a weird creature walking down the middle of the road near Chickies Rock. It looked very thin and covered in hair, and it had glowing yellow eyes. He was able to observe this creature for a few seconds before it bolted for the trees. In the summer of 2012, three sisters and a friend of theirs went camping. I'm going to call her Jane. There was no name given in the story. They planned to stay the summer near Bainbridge, Pennsylvania, in a camper. Not having packed enough provisions, they would walk into town each day for necessities like food and beer. One day, Jane was alone in the camp. Her sisters and their friend were out hiking in the woods. She did the old walk into town and didn't see anything she needed or wanted, and so she walked back to their site. Their site was near a stream on one side and some railroad tracks on the other, in the middle of the thick woods. As the sun was going down, I've already covered this. The sun is not going down, the horizon is moving up. Well, it was getting dark, so there. Jane was sitting by the small campfire waiting for the others to get back. About 30 yards away, something came running from the river. It was a 4-foot tall, hair-covered creature that ran past the camper, coming within 15 feet of where Jane was sitting. It looked right at her as it passed with a shocked look on its face, jumped into a thick pile of brush, and headed towards the railroad tracks. This thing moved like a person would. It ran, pumping its arms, unlike an ape that throws its arms back and forth in order to maintain balance. Jane described her encounter for years as being a young, little kid Bigfoot. People, of course, laughed at her when she would tell her story. Years went by, and by chance, Jane and her husband were searching online for fun things to do when they discovered the Albatwitch Festival in Columbia, Pennsylvania. They decided this was what she had seen running through the camp that evening so many years ago. Howard also told me about hearing a few people mention the Vegetable Man. This is also new to me, and once more I had to look it up. Vegetable Man is a song by Pink Floyd. It's a song by Pink Floyd written by their frontman Syd Barrett and recorded in 1967. Sid was schizophrenic and he took acid. Maybe that's why his music was so different. It was good, but it was different. The song was considered for release as a single, and then they thought about putting it on their second album, A Saucer Full of Secrets, but it was unreleased. The song didn't have an official release until 2016 when it was included in the box set of the early years, 1965 to 72. The first take of the song ends with 15 seconds of laughter from the band. Anybody that knows Pink Floyd will know how they recorded songs like no one else. The song was an attempt to make a follow-up single to See Emily Play, as well as the beginning of A Saucer Full of Secrets. Vegetable Man was scheduled for release as a B-side of Scream Thy Last Scream. This is not what I was going to talk about. The Vegetable Man of West Virginia is a little-known encounter that occurred in Marion County near Grant Town, just north of Fairmont. The creature was described as being a tall, thin being with yellow eyes, pointed ears, long, thin arms that ended in suction cup fingers with needle-tipped claws. The first sighting was in 1975. The nasty, noisy, negative naysayers claim that this was just a hoax. Well, they say that about everything. Well, everything except the moon landing. They say that was real. Did we go to the moon? Eventually. The one small step and all, I am not placing any bets on. Not from 1969. Gray Baker, a Braxton County native and Clarksburg resident, was said to be a hoaxer, doing his best to pull the wool over people's eyes back in the 50s through the 80s. He specialized in UFOs and paranormal events, and he collected his research and correspondence is kept in the Clarksburg Harrison Public Library. Among Gray Baker's extensive collection is the first-hand account from Jennings Frederick that details the Vegetable Man. Fairmont, West Virginia. Jennings was a young boy in school when his mother witnessed a strange-looking monster which came from a flying saucer that had landed in a field near their home. She was washing dishes one morning when she saw this small, black, or dark green creature from her kitchen window. The being had pointed ears, a tail, no clothing, and it was filling a bag with grass and dirt. Just beyond this humanoid figure was a 5-foot tall, 10-foot wide, dome-shaped craft with an extended stairway. The creature appeared to be attached to the ship by a hose or an umbilical cord. The craft was silver and cream, had row of windows, and was producing a humming sound. Mrs. Frederick ran from the window, only to return a few minutes later and see this weird-looking creature re-enter the ship. It began to rotate in a counterclockwise direction. The humming sound increased in volume, and the craft launched into the air and was gone. Mrs. Frederick told her son about this encounter when he returned from school. Jennings found depressions in the ground and claw tracks where dirt and grass had been removed, which convinced Jennings that his mother was telling the truth. In July 1968, Jennings, who was now about 19 years old, had gone hunting near their home. He hadn't had any luck, and he was about to head home when he heard a strange, high-pitched sound. A voice said to him, "You need not fear me. I wish to communicate. I come as a friend. We know of you. I come in peace. I wish for medical assistance. I need your help." Jennings saw a green, skeletal, stalk-like creature. It was about 6 or 7 feet tall, with slanted yellow eyes. It had human-like facial features and a long, vine-like arms that were about as big around as a quarter. Its fingers had suction cups on the end of them with needle-like claws. Before he could move, he felt a vine wrap around him. Then what felt like a needle was stuck into his arm. Did you see Attack of the Saucer Men? The aliens would inject people using needles in their fingertips. It's what they injected that was the kicker. Alcohol. They were getting people drunk. Jennings was unable to get away. The creature had him in some type of a trance-like state. All he was able to do was look at the creature whose eyes had turned from red to yellow. It was sucking blood from Jennings' arm. Once the creature finished, it walked away, discarding him like an empty soda can. Jennings heard an odd humming sound, and he thought it must have been a craft taking off, like the one his mother had seen and heard. Jennings recovered and he went home, a bit lightheaded, but still able to walk. He didn't tell his family of the event. It felt too weird and, well, it was a bit embarrassing. Months later, he did tell the story to a UFO researchers from West Virginia who just happened to be named Gray Baker. Gray dubbed the creature the Vegetable Man. Jennings went on with his life, eventually joining the Air Force. After his discharge, Jennings had a Men in Black type encounter. Between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., Jennings was awoken by a red flashing light coming from the next room. He grabbed his .38 revolver from under his pillow to investigate, and he found a small gas canister sitting on the floor. A hand grabbed him and put a needle into his left arm. He saw 3 men in black turtlenecks, slacks, and ski masks. One of them said, "The dogs have been darted and everyone has been gassed." They put a gas mask over Jennings' face and they questioned him about UFOs, what he thought they were, and what he thought of the future. In the past, many UFO encounters involved warnings from aliens. They said the people of Earth needed to stop messing about with nuclear weapons. If we keep making them, the aliens would have to step in to stop us by whichever means they determined was needed. That was 70 years ago. We still have thousands of nukes and still no alien intervention. This makes me wonder, were they afraid we might destroy ourselves, or were they trying to keep us from being able to defend ourselves? Think about those folks in Washington that keep trying to confiscate our firearms. They say it's so we don't go around shooting up the neighborhood. Or is it so they can force us to work harder and longer and pay in more taxes to them? They want to rule the country just like old King George did back in 1775. The Second Amendment was not put into the Bill of Rights so that we could go hunting. It was there to prevent the government from getting too out of hand. Baker described Frederick as being an amateur rocket expert. Frederick turned into a UFO investigator after he and his mother had had their run-ins with aliens. Bladenboro is a small community surrounded by pine forests and swamps at the southeastern edge of North Carolina. In Bladen County, in the town of Clarkton, December 29, 1953, a local woman heard her neighbor's dogs barking and whimpering. When she went out to investigate, she saw a large cat-like creature skulking off into the darkness. That was the first sighting of the Beast of Bladenboro. On New Year's Eve, Bladenboro Police Chief Roy Forrest was called out to the farm of Woody Storm. Two of Storm's dogs had been killed by something large and powerful. The dogs' bodies had been completely drained of blood. More reports started coming in. DG Pate said he watched from his service station as a dog was attacked by a large creature and drug into the woods. Chief Forrest was Chief Forrest was inundated with reports of dogs being attacked from all across the county. People said they saw an animal like a bear or a panther that was 3 feet long, 20 inches high, with a long tail. Keep that in mind. A long tail and a cat's face. Others reported hearing the creature's scream coming from the swamps near the town, saying it sounded like a woman with a knife stuck in her back. How do they know what that might sound like? That's not a sound that you can just find anywhere. January 1st, the bodies of 2 more dogs were discovered. These 2 had been drained of blood. Chief Forrest decided it was time to call for help. A team of professional hunters were brought in from Wilmington to track down this animal. Chief Forrest accompanied the tracking party, and he said he saw footprints about the size of a silver dollar. That's not very big, but then in January 5th, the Beast of Bladenboro attacked a human. Mrs. C.E. Kinslaw heard the sound of a whimpering dog outside her house. She went outside to investigate. She spotted a large, cat-like creature rushing towards her. Mrs. Kinslaw screamed and her husband rushed outside. The beast was frightened off and it fled back into the woods. Newspapers picked up the story, and soon Bladenboro was overwhelmed with a flurry of hunters coming in eager to bag this beast. About 600 men from as far away as Tennessee had descended on this town. Nobody knew exactly what they were hunting. The speculation became rampant. Some thought it was the Carolina panther, a species of large cat that had lived in the area until the early 20th century. Others said they were dealing with a coyote or a stray dog. Most of those who had descended on Bladen County thought that the only way to find out what this thing was to kill it. The town was terrified. Ev Butler, who was a young man in Bladenboro at the time, said, "Night time was the feared time around these parts. As the sun set, the entire community on the west side of town went indoors, and they didn't come out unless necessary." The fear of the beast had a very real effect on Mr. Butler and his family. "We didn't live in town limits at the time, and almost everybody had an outside privy." That's an outhouse. To supplement the outside inconvenience, most houses had a thunder jug, a big jug that could be used at night and emptied into the privy during the day. That jug got plenty of use during the scare. Aren't you glad we have flush toilets? Deciding that things were getting too dangerous, Bladenboro Mayor Bob Fusel and Chief Forrest called an end to the hunt. On January 13th, an unusually large bobcat that had been trapped by a local farmer was hung from a flagpole in the center of town. They posted a sign underneath stating, "This is the Beast of Bladenboro." After a few weeks, things settled down back to normal. The hunters left town and the reports of killings stopped coming in. Whether the Beast of Bladenboro it had vanished back into the night and the swamps from where it had first emerged. The reason I said keep in mind that long tail, bobcats don't have long tails. They got little bitty short ones. That's why they're called bobcats. The Santa Lucia mountain range forms some of the most difficult terrain in California. Stretching for about 150 miles, they form an almost impenetrable barrier between the interior of the continental United States and the coast. Early explorers were unable to cross them, and they had to divert south or north to reach the Pacific. Even today, their magnificent belt of rugged and jagged granite peaks, which drop suddenly to the sea below. Whatever it is people have reported seeing in these mountains, they all agree on the name that they have given them as being an apt description. They have been dubbed the Dark Watchers. They appear as tall, mysterious figures with silhouettes slightly silently watching over everybody below from the mountaintops. Visitors spot the Dark Watchers during late afternoon and twilight when the sun starts descending. The horizon really is moving up. You can look up at the sharp ridges of the Santa Lucia mountain range, and maybe you'll notice some black, shadowy silhouettes silently standing there watching you. People have said the Watchers can be up to 10 feet tall, sometimes taller, and they appear to be wearing capes. Some of them even have on hats. Witnesses state that the tall shadows, with an almost human-like silhouette, appear as if they are looking directly at whoever's looking at them. Do not try to approach and find out who they are, as they are said to be able to disappear in an instant. Although the modern tales of the Dark Watchers started around 1930, their origins stretch back at least 300 years. The local Chumash Indians did not have written records, but tales have been passed down that suggest whatever is being seen out there, they had been there for some time. The first Spanish explorers navigating their way up the mountains noticed the dark figures and named them Los Vigilantes Oscuros, which translates as the Dark Watchers. American settlers moving through the mountains also reported seeing the figures, and even they were not visible there, were many reports that people in the area felt the sensation of being watched by somebody. The Watchers are so well known that a general description of them has been put together. Alongside their unusual heights and their long black flowing coats and hats with wide brims, some witnesses report the Watchers have sticks like a walking stick or a staff held in their hands. One of the common highlights in all the sightings of the Dark Watchers is the enigmatic dark silhouette. None of the people who have ever witnessed a Dark Watcher confirm the details of their facial features. All one could think of these mysterious figures is that they are watching over the mountain range for some unknown purpose. Several suggestions have been put forward over the years to explain the Watchers. For example, some have suggested the Watchers are just a group of migratory people who observe but avoid travelers in the mountain range. Some legends are more supernatural, saying the Watchers are there to help people who wander off their path in the mountains. The Dark Watchers have been said to have impeccable hearing and eyesight to aid travelers in the region. One of the interesting legends surrounding the Watchers is that they are visible only to travelers with simple possessions, such as a walking stick and a hat. If you're carrying high-tech equipment on your hiking gear while you move through the mountains, the legend states that you're less likely to find the Watchers. So if you're carrying a camera or anything like that, forget it. You're not going to see them. The young Mexican-American protagonist in Flight is warned by his mother to stay safe from the Dark Watchers. Interestingly, the mother of Steinbeck, Olive, Olive, having tongue trouble tonight. Try that again. Interestingly, the mother of Steinbeck, Olive Hamilton, was a school teacher and a staunch believer in the Watchers. She used to leave fruit and nuts in the area known as Mule Deer Canyon for the Watchers while on her way to school. Steinbeck's mother would find flowers on her way back in the exact spot where she'd left the food. In Wisconsin, they have a creature known as a Hodag. It is said to be a completely real creature that was blown up with dynamite in the North Woods 130 years ago. The Hodag is a bizarre creature, and it is the unofficial mascot of Rhinelander. I've been to Rhinelander, but that was about 100 years ago, and I vaguely remember it. Wisconsin has some beautiful territory, the land of 1,000 lakes. Unfortunately, it snows like all get out up there, and you'll freeze parts of your body off. Nah, I'll stick to Texas. A Northwoods timberman, Eugene Simon Shepard, was telling stories about the Hodag in the logging camps in the late 1800s. He described the creature as a terrible brute with a dragon's body, fangs, a snarling grin that smelled of buzzard meat and skunk perfume. There's a description. The inhabitants of Wisconsin learned of the Hodag in October 1893 when Shepard wrote of it in a column in the Rhinelander's Near North newspaper. 1952, a person said they were attacked and injured by the Hodag. This caused a posse to be formed and men went looking for this creature. Shepard wrote that he and his friends came across the Hodag with their hunting dogs. The creature had the strength of an ox, the ferocity of a bear, and the cunning of a fox. It tore apart the dogs and remained undefeated, even after the men shot it with heavy rifles. The men didn't want to give up and allow the beast to continue attacking people, so they used dynamite that not only killed the thing, but blew it in every direction. 3 years after, claiming to have blown up the Hodag, a shepherd wrote that he'd apprehended one. This time it was alive. He wrote that he and his friends had captured the creature by blocking its den with rocks and then knocking it out with chloroform. A few days later, Shepard put this Hodag on display in a tent at the first ever Oneida County Fair. In reality, Shepard and his friends had sculpted the creature with wood and smelly hides from a tannery. Shepard's son made the ruse believable, growling and hissing and moving the fake Hodag like a puppet. The fake Hodag was about 7 feet long, 30 inches high, black, and covered in hair. It had 12 horns rising along its spine and short legs ending in long claws. Shepard quickly hustled people in and out of the Hodag tent, telling them it was for their own safety. The tent was dimly lit, and the creature was held behind curtains a good distance away from the crowd. Some fairgoers certainly believed it was real, and after that the legend of the Hodag took off. News of the creature spread across the country, and newspapers like the Philadelphia Inquirer reported on it as if it were real. It wasn't long before the whole thing was reported to have been a hoax, but by then the story was out. During the 19th century, unknown animals were still being discovered. For somebody living in Philadelphia, it was not outside the realm of possibility that an animal like the Hodag could be found in the wilderness of northern Wisconsin. Yes, I've been there too. Saw the northern lights one night. That was impressive. We were almost in Canada. The Hodag is the mascot of the Rhinelander High School and has been since the 1930s, but it's also the mascot of the whole city. The city of Rhinelander has a giant green Hodag sculpture outside of its visitor center. Hodag art throughout its streets and even holds the Hodag County Music Festival, which attracts thousands of people and has been held since 1978. In recent years, the Hodag has made its way out of Wisconsin into the greater cultural consciousness and pages of cryptid lore. The creature has appeared in various video games, and in 2012, it was on Scooby-Doo. It was called the Hodag of Horror. The 2015 version of the popular cryptid book Fearsome Creatures featured a horror-inspired retelling of the Hodag, where the creature was described as a 3,000-pound carnivorous bull-horned rhinoceros with a spiny back and the master of the Michigan lumber woods. The book assigned the Hodag a fearsomeness level of 12, which is the highest on the scale. Maybe the Hodag story wasn't real. The guy being able to capture such a fierce animal and put it on display, unbelievable. However, could it have been inspired by some creature that was encountered in the woods way back, like the spiny armadillo, maybe? A giant armadillo at that. The South American giant armadillo gets up to 40 inches long and can weigh as much as 70 pounds. The Hodag was said to be twice as big as the giant armadillo. Over time, might the creature have found its way north? Probably not. They don't much like cold weather. Could these unknown creatures be slipping through some other dimension? Maybe what people are seeing is a real, live beast only visiting our world for brief moments. Maybe they're as startled as people that are seeing them. I hope I covered everything that Lowell was wondering about, plus a bit to fill out the hour. This is what I try to do. I look into things, strange things, and find out what there is to know about them. If you have any stories you'd like to share, or if you've got some questions you'd like answered, I will do my best to either put you in my next book or figure out if the story you're referencing is true. You can contact me at strangethings@arcanasa.com. And for those of you that follow Arcanasa, I just wanted to let you know that Arturo got out of surgery just fine, and he looks like he'll still be with us for a while. Yeah, I've also been on Paranormal Round Table. I was about to say Rundown. Different show. I've been on Paranormal Round Table with Josh Turner several times in the last couple of months. We talk about all things UFO and paranormal. Talk about getting off on some tangents. Check him out. Josh Turner, Paranormal Roundtable. It's a good podcast that I follow as well. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.